The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hidden Horsepower is back once again, presented by Total Seal Piston Rings. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Castello. We're once again joined by the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal, Mr. Keith Jones. Keith, another episode. How are you?
I'm great. How about yourself today, Joe?
I'm great. I'm loving these episodes. We get down in the year. Winter is coming. Everybody is finishing their seasons, all kinds of different implications and points championships. And we want to pump out some podcasts for people that are on their way to PRI or the holidays or who knows, maybe they're getting ready for 2022. But we got to pump out that content, and that's exactly what we're doing. Today, I am very excited because we have got a special guest, Gary Stinnett. Gary Stinnett Racing Engines in Emporia, Kansas. This guy is a four-time Super Comp world champ in the NHRA. He was a crew guy for Warren Johnson. He's won the U.S. Nationals, 30 years in the business. It is going to be awesome. How about you?
I am so pleased that Gary could get on here. Gary's not only a great long-time customer of Total Seal Piston Rings, he's a friend. He and I have broken bread many times, told many war stories, sat around the same dinner table with other racers, and just had a great time. I am so very pleased to have Gary on here to take his time out of his very, very busy day and very, very busy racing schedule to slot a little bit of time out of there for us. I appreciate it more than I can possibly tell him. And again, for those of you that don't know Gary, this guy is just such a consummate builder, record keeper, logbook, data, knows the math. What more can I say? He's an engine builder's engine builder.
And the .90 style of racing that happens in the NHRA, my opinion is that it is misunderstood by many other racers out there, how challenging, complex, difficult it can be. And so I'm super excited to speak with Gary about that and find out, honestly, can you build an engine for that style of racing, or are you just trying to make as much power as is possible? Before we bring him on, just the idea of a four-time world champion who is also building his own engines, who is competing and racing himself at the same time, that doesn't always happen all the time, Keith. We find a lot of the guys who are engine builders, they want to or feel the need to give up the wheel to go focus on the engine shop. Gary hasn't done that. He's out there banging his head against the wall very often.
Yeah, absolutely, positively. Gary's one of these guys, and he'll be able to speak for himself, but if it came down to one or the other, you're either going to build engines or you're going racing, we'll just say, I know the answer to that question, because Gary is the consummate racer. He is, again, takes what he knows. I mean, what a perspective. He's got both sides of it, not only building engines, making power, building that reliability, but he knows what it takes to make that package go down the racetrack and go rounds and win races. So what better perspective or advantage could a guy have than knowing both sides of that coin?
There you have it. For those of you out there, click subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's going to get better from here. Joining us now from Gary Stinnett Racing Engines, aforementioned four-time world champion, Mr. Gary Stinnett. Gary, welcome to Hidden Horsepower. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
So what's the answer? We got to hear it from you, though. Racing or building engines in an engine shop, if you got to pick one or the other.
Oh, I'd rather race full-time, like everybody would. But you got to make a living somehow, and racing doesn't always pay the bills.
Yes, but sometimes it does. For you, you've had a very successful career, and just ticking off all of those different things, more than 25 NHRA national event wins. Your customers have won more than 17 national championships. You've got a very strong racing resume in all forms of racing, not just the National Hot Rod Association. Any of those stats would be, a lot of people would be happy with those.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in my career, from winning races to getting great customers, working with great manufacturers such as Keith and the guys at Total Seal and Matt. I mean, you've heard this in every kind of sport, but if you surround yourself with successful people, you don't have any choice but to become successful.
Wow. And it is actually very, very true. You've won races in stock, super gas, but Super Comp is where you've had your world championship success. Why do you think that is? And do you agree with me that .90 racing, Super Comp, Super Gas, Super Street, IHRA side of the world, hot rod, quick rod, that style of racing, so many people do it, but outside of the people who actually do it, I feel it is greatly misunderstood and unappreciated for what it is.
Sure, it really is misunderstood. Many of the old timers and many of the guys that start out racing were diehard, first to the finish line. They not only don't understand it, but they hate it so much. It goes against the grain of what they started out doing that they don't even want to hear about it or understand it. And so they just are completely tuned out. What's kind of funny now is right now there are a lot of young kids coming out of juniors into racing. And what's pretty cool is that a lot of them are from famous fathers that have been in the pros, such as, Alan Johnson's daughter is starting and Robert Height's daughter is starting. And so I've been spending some time with Robert Height in the last, I guess I met him at Indy, and then he was over at St. Louis, and he's absolutely amazed at the amount of technology we have and the things that we do that are so parallel to the exact same thing of running a top fuel car. And that's why, I've been friends with Billy Torrance for many, many years, and he's over there meddling in the top fuel, crews, and they're trying to get him out of the trailer. Look, we'll dial the car, we'll figure this out, but he's wanting to do it like he does a Super Comp car. The technology we have is parallel to what they do, but they just think we just turn a nut or a bolt and run down there and go 890, and that's all there is to it. They don't understand the hours and hours and years. I have 30 years worth of data of every kind of wind angle, wind speed, and everything, track temperature. I've had to study and spend hours reading and researching about different weather conditions and situations and why they microclimates and stuff that affects all that, so that you can dial this car. Because we're a top fuel car or pro stock car is trying to make the perfect run, and they're trying to get their clutch dialed into the track temperature and all that. We are trying to make the perfect run, and we are dealing with thousandths of a second. Many of the races that we run or that I've won and or lost are sometimes not just to the thousandths, they're down to 4 zeros. So we are just as serious and just as, and in most cases, as intelligent as the other side of the coin, the other side of the fence. It's just a different, unique sport.
Very interesting. No, I agree. And the excitement. And the driver has to drive the car. I think of the sprint car driver who makes a last lap pass, the Super Comp racer going down there and making the determination to not take the stripe or, show the nose, that kind of stuff. Like those millisecond decisions are the equivalent. And it's a pretty cool thing to watch. But let's start at the very beginning. I always like to get the story about young Gary and how this happened to you. How did you get this affliction for engines, for mechanics, for working on cars, for going fast? How did that all happen?
Well, like most people, my dad raced. So I went to my first drag race at 6 weeks old. This is a neat sidebar, is that my parents actually met at the 1955 U.S. Nationals at Great Bend, Kansas. My dad went there to watch this big event that was happening, and my mom rode with her brother in his new Corvette, and they met. And so my parents were met at a drag race, and then I was born in 62. And my dad had about every kind of race car that you could have. He seemed to not be able to make up his mind. One of his first cars was a 55 Chevy with a straight axle, E-gas, the headers came out over top of the front tires and all that.
Wow.
And there was a young man that drove it. He was only 17, 18 years old. I think his name was Alan Patterson, and from Augusta, Kansas. That's where my father grew up, and that's where my grandparents lived. So Alan and my dad were partners in 62 or 3, somewhere in there. And my dad had the car, and Alan had the engine. So from my childhood years, the Patterson family and my family were best of friends. Barbara Patterson babysat me while my mom worked, and so I grew up around the Pattersons and was always inspired when I saw Alan quit his job at the airplane factory in Wichita to start his own race engine business. And when I was 13, my parents divorced and my dad moved to California, so he could be around racing more. But I'm stuck back here in Kansas, so I hitched a ride to the races every week with whoever I could go with. And so I again around Alan Patterson, went with him. I went with a guy named Smitty, John Smith, that passed away a little while ago. My good friend Dick Ross here in town. So I was going to the races as a teenager, doing whatever I could do, and I ended up getting a job when I was 18 out of school with Norman Palmer, two-time comp eliminator world champion. And sadly enough, every time somebody brings up my name and my career, they always bring up the Warren Johnson thing. But actually, Norman Palmer and another guy, an NHRA racer, Billy Graham, I worked for both of them at the same time. I had to make ends meet. And Billy Graham had started his machine shop called Performance Machine. So I'm in there learning the business, hot tanking the engines, taking them apart. We're doing valve jobs. So I'm in the machine shop there. And then I'm working for Norman Palmer, going racing with his, this had been in 1981. He'd won the world championship in 80 at Ontario Motor Speedway, and I was there helping him as a crew guy. I made $100 a week working for him then. and I worked for him. And then finally I moved back to Emporia in 82. By 83, I started my own machine shop called Midwest Machine Shop. I'm pretty young. I mean, I'm only 21 years old, but I started a machine shop, and a friend of mine built the shop that we're still in today, 30 by 60 front building. We've added on now. It's 60 by 60 in the back and 30 by 60 in the front. But I ran Midwest Machine Shop for 3 years, and then got the opportunity to go to work for WJ in 86. So I sold the shop, its contents anyway, and moved on to Atlanta. I worked for him for 1 year, and part of the reason that he hired me was I had a CDL license. I'd worked in machine shops. I'd grown up around racing. But in 1974, I think, or maybe 73, my dad had a Pro Stock Vega, and it wasn't NHRA competitive, but everybody around here ran AHRA. So they had a big Pro Stock meet at Kansas City, and I'll never forget this because all the Vegas, it was almost all Vegas, a couple Camaros, DeLon Joseph, a couple other cars, but every Vega was running like high nines, 990s. Warren rolls in with a big block. All the other cars were small blocks, 331s. He comes in with his big block, D-stroke to 348. He had a Lenko, nobody else. They had Borg Warner Super 210s. And he laid down some like 917 to 920s, right? So my dad somehow managed to win all the rounds, and we had to run Warren Johnson in the final. It wasn't even close, but I still have photos of that day. Warren Johnson with the wheels up, leaving, going down the track, and he's in a short sleeve shirt, plaid shirt with a pocket, no driving jacket, open face helmet. And there's pictures that day of Kurt standing there, who's a year younger than me. Arlene's putting gas in the back of that Vega in the stock gas tank location with an Army gas can. It's pretty cool. So I had a little bit of a tie into Warren when I called about the job, and he gave me jobs. So back then there was only Kurt and Arlene and me and Warren, and there was a guy named Danny Bittner that did some chassis work in-house, but there was just the 3 or 4 of us going to the races. So when you ask what I did there, it was everything. We did everything. I mean, I drove the truck and set up the awning and unloaded the car. In between runs, I pulled the Lenko out and we took the clutch apart. I took the front end off, project the car, wheels and tires, pack the chutes, put everything back together. And when we get home, pull it all back apart, put it on the dyno. And then during the week, I machine blocks. And this is a cool story, and I can tell it now. But at the time, nobody was moving lifter bores around, and nobody was doing any of that stuff. Warren got his blocks from Oldsmobile with no lifter bores. So we moved the lifters over so we could move the port over and we could move the rocker over. So I actually made cam cores manually in a lathe that we made them out of 8620. We sent them then to Harvey Crane to his house, who would carry them in the back door of the shop to grind them. And we didn't have Jessel rockers yet. They were out there, but not for that head. So I made stands out of bars. I mean, I come to work and he said, there's some bar stock still. We're going to make some rocker stands, put Jessel rockers on this thing. I mean, when I started there, he had Crane roller rockers. So, wow. anyway, we made all that stuff in-house and did all that kind of work. So I did a little bit of everything, and including honing blocks. So after a year of that, and I met my current wife while I was there, moved back to Kansas in July of 87 and started the business, and I'm still here.
Wow. That is amazing. And for you listeners out there who are on the fence about subscribing to Hidden Horsepower, I think you should have just been sold right there by the great WJ stuff. And, of course, the idea that your parents met at the first ever U.S. Nationals in Great Bend, Kansas. Like, that's a stat I'm going to use on the mic, Gary. Thanks for telling me. Keith, jump in here with a question for Gary.
Well, where I was going to go with Gary, and it's a question and a comment at the same time. One of the things like Gary just mentioned, working with Warren, and the guys, we've got all this crazy, incredibly, automated equipment out there today that does a fantastic job. But I always go back to the guy that learned on a manual machine and had great success on a manual machine is still, that's light years ahead of what you've got with the automatics. The automatics are great, but you're standing there punching in numbers, doing the thing. When a guy stands there and learns, looking at the color of the cylinder, listening to the sound of the hone, because there's a sound to it, and then looking at the finished result, the finishes come out. I mean, they just absolutely come out. There's a couple of guys, and as you know, Joe, I've been all over the world checking cylinders, and I've checked some that were very, very good, but there's two people, and I'm going to name them both right now. There's a guy here in Phoenix, a guy named Bud Yancer, manifold and cylinder head development. Bud stands behind a CK10, and I can look at that cylinder, and I know that it's right. I'll whip out a profilometer, check it, and sure enough, Bud's numbers are right on. The other one's Gary Stinnett. Gary's, used profilometers from us, taking them. We thought we had some questions, thought maybe his finishes were off a little bit. Gary's checking them, but again, we're back to the color's right, the look is right, the experience level that he has is, telling him, hey, I know these are right. And sure enough, bang, they're right on. I mean, so, there's something to be said about, working behind those machines and learning, how to grind valves on an old manual, machine, learning how to do those processes. And when you bring that into the modern equipment, you're just that much further ahead. The other, now going to more of the question, for Gary is, things have changed a lot. There was a time, you and I've talked about this a couple times, where everything would come back, 80 runs, 100 runs, and you'd see the engine back. And nowadays, I mean, they're coming back, 250 runs, 300 runs, 400, and so on. I just had a guy that runs Top Dragster. They've got 900 runs on the engine, wants to know if he thinks it ought to be rebuilt by now. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, you may want to get in there and look at it. Looking at that and the ring technologies and how we've moved things forward in materials and coatings, with that stuff in mind, Gary, what kind of changes have you had to make to accommodate, the length of time that's going between the rebuilds these days? Sorry for such a long question.
Well, I'll get to that in a second. I want to back up to something, comment you made. I still hone every block myself on a 1983 CK10. I do not have diamond stones. I don't have it automated. It's a manual. I mean, it looks old, and it's old, and it works great. And I've trained a few guys on it, employees over the years. A couple of them gone and start their own engine building business. And what I told them from the get-go, right from the get, I said, you can be a machine operator or you can be a machinist. And that came from WJ. And I said, the thing about operating any of these machines, any machines, is learning how to, and that's what I call it, drive it. Listen to the machine, drive it, manipulate it. The nice thing about a manual machine is I can save some cylinder walls and save material by different techniques that I've used over the years to cheat, to move it, to do what I needed to do to save that cylinder wall without just punching the block out another 10, 20, 30 over. We can do those things. But as far as whether you have to have a diamond hone or you have to have an automated state-of-the-art, great $125,000 machine, you do not. And the proof is this. On most of our engines, we get higher vacuum readings in a lot of shops, and we do it without a vacuum pump. My own personal engine, and I've shown this to you, Keith, at Indy. When I'm warming it up, anybody's welcome to come look. I have a vacuum gauge on the dash. I'll have 22 to 23 inches warming it up without a vacuum pump, and not a high-end Daily or any high-end dry sump pump. It's a Moroso catalog 5-stage dry sump pump. I'll have 22, 23 inches warming the thing up. I still have 19 and a half inches at the finish line. That was honed with vitrified stones in a CK10. It wasn't hot honed, and I used Total Seal gapless rings in an aluminum block. That's it. And aluminum blocks are notorious for not having vacuum or not making power. We make as much power with an aluminum block as we do with an iron. It requires proper honing technique, proper ring and ring lands, and if you get everything right, you don't have to have that stuff if you have the experience of knowing how to hone.
Amen. One of the things that I see so much today, and it's exactly what Gary just said, and this is not throwing stones at anybody, but there's the difference, and it's a huge difference between being a machinist and a machine operator. Going back to what Gary was saying was like working at WJ's. I mean, okay, here's a hunk of bar stock. Take this Jessel that wasn't made for this head and make it fit. Take 10 sets of puzzles, throw all the pieces and together, and then make it all work out at the end. And that's a true machinist. And these are the guys that can make anything work, make anything out of something or something into anything, and they are truly artists. And the guys like Gary that will take the time, work with an up and comer, a new guy in his shop, to again teach him how to work that machine. The CK10 is a fantastic machine. You just have to have somebody that's willing to take the time, again, to work with you, to get the look, to get the listen, to get the sound of what that cylinder sounds like when it's honing. And unfortunately, a lot of places just don't want that anymore. That's where the automated have become so very, very popular, because they can have a machine operator that they can just stand in front of it and watch it go. And it's a true testament, to guys like Gary that have, taken the time to really, know their trade, know their craft, learn it, and be able to share that information. It's a rare thing today.
To answer your question, Keith, about the longevity of these engines, it boils down to there's a lot. I mean, it's no single answer. You know better than anybody. We have all this different kind of material, a cylinder wall and blocks, from compacted graphite to nickel steel sleeves to a gray iron to a sleeve in an aluminum block. And so when guys ask me how many runs I can get out of my engine, what I try to tell people is, look, you can run it as long as you dare. We like to see them at 200 quarter-mile runs. Now, the 8th-mile bracket racing has become so widespread. You will hear stories all the time of, 300, 400, 600, 700 runs, or even 1,000 runs. But 8th-mile bracket racing, or 8th-mile racing, period, is a lot less brutal to that engine. Years ago, I didn't believe that. 30 years ago, I said, no, it's the burnout. It's the first 8th mile that's so hard on it, the second. But I've been doing a lot of 8th mile racing myself, and I took my engine apart. I did a little over 218 runs in the 8th mile with one of my Camaros last year. Took the motor apart. It looked brand new. And so I've been changing my opinion on that. Apparently, it's the second half of the run that does a lot of wear. And, even oil changes, I've always been an advocate for changing the oil in 20 to 30 runs, period. Let's keep clean oil in the thing. And as soon as you start going 8th mile racing, you start noticing this oil is like brand new. So when people start asking about how many runs, you got to ask them, are you talking quarter mile? Are you talking 8th mile? Are you on alcohol? Are you on gasoline? And engine temperature plays a big difference. I had a guy that just kept having trouble, and got talking to him, and he had the water temperature. He was running the engine so hot and double and triple entering things that the oil was getting burned up and cooked in a very, very short amount of time. So there's so many factors about when somebody starts telling you how many runs they put on the car as to what type of racing and even what water temperature or engine temperature or oil temperature they're running the thing at. That makes sense?
It does.
Oh, absolutely. It's all the little details behind the answer. You've got to dig to know that, to get, again, we're back to the data, to know all the data. What happened? What did you do? How do you run it? These are things that we deal with here every day is, you got to keep digging, because rarely does that information just come out right up front.
So being that we're on a show about piston rings, we ought to talk about some ring technology a little bit, because it kind of ties in what we just finished. 35 years ago, when we used, just some plasma moly, Speed Pro rings, and we had stock blocks. I remember the stock 350 010 blocks that we all ran when pretty much everybody ran small blocks. And in 30 runs, the cylinder walls were not straight again. You literally, if you were running them in super stock, which I did that in the early 80s, was involved in that, you had to pull those motors out every 30 runs and rehone them if you wanted to be fast. Well, with today's blocks and cylinder walls that are so rigid and so much better, like Nicosil, I mean, we've got a customer that ran an ex-NASCAR motor with Nicosil sleeves, 5 complete bracket racing seasons before we even took it apart. And, a good friend of mine, Rick Mann, I called him and I said, hey, what do I do with this Nicosil cylinder wall? He says, look good? Yeah, nothing. Put it back together. Put a set of rings in it, put it right back together. Don't even hone it. Clean it, put it back together. And so it really does matter what the whole configuration is. But as far as the ring goes, since we started using Total Seal rings, everything got light years better. The quality, the material, and every single thing. They treat piston rings like I do my racing. I want to know exactly what material it is, and I want batch to batch, and I want to know the tension and the radial and everything I can know about it. I mean, I've tried to learn that going back. The two guys that really were, imperative in my career, Nolan Palmer and Warren Johnson, the first thing I learned from them is they knew every single alloy of whatever they were going to use in any part of their race car. They knew the properties of that alloy. They spouted the numbers off. They talked about 86, 20, 93, 10, 43, 40. I didn't know what that meant then. But once you start learning about every single thing about piston rings, you become so much better about putting the right ring in it and the right clearance and the right end gap and being able to get a lot more, not only power, but longevity out of that engine. I can't imagine going back to just ordering a set of rings out of a catalog ever again. I mean, every single thing I call Keith for, even if it's for a very mild bracket car, I still custom order every ring set so I get what I want exactly.
And so for someone who builds engines for stock eliminator cars and super stock cars versus super comp, super gas, top dragster, how different is the strategy for ring package? Because you have rules keeping you restricted in one area, and the other area can do pretty much whatever you want. Talk a little bit about the difference in those two different styles.
Well, in stock eliminator, you're stuck with the 078 ring groove in the piston. NHRA mandates you can't change the ring groove. Well, and they're not all 078, but predominantly all the 70s and 80s cars that we build those engines for are. So then you're into ring spacers, and you're into gas-ported ring spacers, and then you can back cut the ring and reduce the tension. So you can get into a lot of different ways of reducing the tension and making the ring lighter, and then, of course, trying to keep the ring groove tight. And then you learn things like in stock eliminator, where we use a ring spacer, we learned the hard way that even though the ring spacer should be, in air quotes, permanent, when it gets just even a thousandths of wear to it, you re-ring it and you don't replace those, you're down on power. So I'm a firm believer when I put rings in a stocker with spacers, we put new spacers in every time. And I don't like to spend that money, but I'd rather have that thing be right. Because in stock eliminator, it's every 2 horsepower on my dyno is 100th of ET. So you can't give up a couple horsepower by trying to shortcut anything in the ring. And then when you move to super stock, where the ring package rules are basically wide open, and now you can start talking about, when a guy calls me about a super stock motor, I have to ask him, what do you want to spend on rings? And he's like, what do you mean? Well, we can spend 500 or we can spend 2,500. It's all in what you want. How fast do you want to go? How long do you want it to last? On the high-end rings that we buy from Keith, you could spend that couple $1,000s, but guess what? They will last 3 seasons. Now, so that suddenly is not so bad instead of the guy who wants to pay $500 every year or $700 or $800. But it also depends on the RPM. That's the other thing. If you have a long stroke, lower RPM super stock engine, if you're not going to rev it up, I haven't seen a big benefit in spending a gobs of money on an ultra thin, high end ring when you're not going to go to that RPM. Obviously, on a pro stock motor, comp eliminator motor, when you want to use, a 0.7 millimeter ring or something like that, or thinner, that's got an advantage. But if you're only revving this thing up, if it's some 400 Pontiac or a 455 Buick, and it never sees 7,000 RPM, I haven't seen there's a gain in getting the ring very thin and very light because it just doesn't see that RPM. Do you agree with that, Keith?
It comes down to friction, like you said, Gary, and it's that diminishing point of return. And as you do rev it up and go higher and higher and higher, you definitely see the benefits of the lighter ring pack, ring stays sealed better coming through ring reversal, top and bottom dead center. We got to look at the mass. We're trying to change directions in microseconds, and so the ring mass comes into play. So yeah, as the RPM goes up, I definitely see the increased benefits. With the thinner ring versus a low RPM engine, and the frictional losses come into play as well. So as that RPM keeps coming up and up and up and up, the engine becomes more sensitive. So we've got to look at the frictional losses, viscosity of oil. There's so many, we'll say fluid dynamic things that are happening in this engine, to look at all of these different perspectives. But as Gary stated, the higher you turn it, the lighter that ring pack needs to be.
Now, what about you got 190 mile per hour Super Comp dragster, super gassers? You build engines for top dragsters, which are, they're consistency engines versus max horsepower engines. How do you attack that strategy? Is there a plan for building a consistent engine as opposed to a max horsepower engine, if that makes sense?
Yeah, we definitely try to put something like we'll put more oil ring tension in the blower motors than we'd ever put anything else. And, in the beginning, like everybody, 20 some years ago when you were learning how to do it, you didn't have enough, and you had more blow by, you had, the blower motors especially would pump oil out and all that. And as we go along and learn what they need, what they like, and we've got it now down to, one of our best customers and always a perennial top 10, Al Kinney, running 16s and 620s, and he's calling telling me he doesn't get a tablespoon of oil out of his breather tank at the end of a run. There's guys that pump a quart out, so definitely you're going to do something different on the entire ring package on a blown motor as you would a carbureted NA engine or a nitrous engine. Obviously everybody that's listening to this would know on a nitrous or even a blown, any kind of a power adder type application, you're going to open the ring gaps up. You're going to go to a better TNT type ring, for the heat. So all that's different from Super Comp, Super Gas. There are people in Super Comp, Super Gas style or, bracket style that'll try to go to the really trick rings, and then they're not going to get the life out of them. And then you'll see them, 150 runs in, they're puffing a little bit of smoke. Maybe they lost a mile an hour or two. So there's a fine line there of I want to go as fast as I can go so everybody wants to go 190 in Super Comp. So you try to use a thinner ring, a lighter ring tension, and get it right. But at the same time, in my opinion, you need to get 200 runs out of the thing. So there's times when we give up. I mean, I've been on the end where I had ultralight oil rings in my own engine, and it haze smoke all year long. I don't take it apart to fix it. I learned the next year. We addressed the oil ring tension. We also addressed the piston shape, the barrel, got the rock better, and it dries up, and there's zero smoke, and the power's up, and you can go 190 and make 200 runs. So, yeah, there's definitely that's why I said earlier, every single engine we build, I call Keith, and we go through it. I usually have in my mind what I want already, just need his approval. But we put custom rings in every single engine. I don't hardly use anything off the shelf. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I just am that fussy and picky about what I want in every single customer application. And that's why I deal with Total Seal.
And I want to reiterate what Gary just said, and Gary does. I mean, Gary does not buy an off-the-shelf ring kit. We talk about what it is, what the end result is, that we want to get out of that engine, and put that package together. I'm just a little while ago, I had a gentleman call me, small Chevy, bought somebody's super stock car. They're going through the engine, and what ring pack? And you have to kind of, and Gary knows this better anyway. You have to know your customer. You've got to know, how's this guy going to take care of it? How much life does he get out of it? How much money does he want to spend? What kind of racer is this guy? Is this guy going to the track every weekend, looking for a win? He's going there loaded, or is he going there, well, he's more of a casual observer, he wants to go, but, and this gentleman and I speaking today, we talked about 0.7 millimeter stuff, and end of the day, this what's right for him is our 0.9 package. It's less expensive. He's not looking for it to be on kill. He's just getting into this. So, like Gary said, you got to kind of look at who they are, what they want, what their expectations are out of this particular piece, and then get them the right part. Don't just throw them something because hey, this is the trickiest thing of the week. That may not be the right thing for what this person's doing, and that's the last thing we ever want to be accused of is trying to sell something to somebody they don't need. It's always a matter of doing that digging, doing that, learning what that customer's true needs. You got your wants and you got your needs, and then what's right, and figuring out what's right for that guy. And that's one of the things that's always great working with Gary is talking with, who the guy is, what the car is, what it's going to do, what do they expect out of it, and hey, this is where we ought to be. I think this is the one to go with, and we're almost always on point together with that.
Gary, how many engines come out of your shop in a typical year? I know you're very busy over there. Can you quantify it?
It's hard. I would say around 50. We're not. I have to tell a lot of customers this when they call up. If a guy calls me up and says, I need a quote on an engine, I almost stop him right there. We are not the cheapest. We are not the fastest. We are not a production shop. We are a custom racing engine shop. The people who come to me want, just like I do from Keith to Total Seal, want a specific thing, and they want it really right and nice. So if the people are price shopping or they need an engine in 2 weeks, I tell them I can't help them. They need to go on, because we take so much time. Every single part is massaged, rubbed, or ordered specifically the way we want it, and it just takes a long time to do that. So, you hear guys. I've talked to everybody in the industry, and I've been in business since '87, and your guys like, I got 78 engines on the floor. That's wonderful for you. It's not for me. Many years ago, we tried to do a lot more, and we had all these engines lined up, and a guy actually came in and looked at all these engines, and he goes, well, with all that many, and you got to rebuild all of them, surely one of them is going to blow up. And I looked at him like, what? Well, when it was all said and done, one did. And I'm like, that's kind of right. You start trying to rush stuff, and I hear these stories of guys, putting engines together 2 to 3 a week. There's no way you can do everything that at least we do, measuring and recording and do all that, and do 2 to 3 weeks. Somebody has to be putting stuff together with an air wrench or electric impact to do, to dyno that many. We dyno everything, and so I just can't imagine zinging them together. 1 to 1.5 a week is really keeps you very busy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, it takes time. There are guys that have big shops with lots of people and lots of personnel, but in so many instances, it's hard to keep an eye on all the things that are going on and all the moving, fluid pieces in something like that. So, at a place like Gary's, I know that, as he stated, everything's being looked at, every part's being touched, massaged, and overseen. And that's how you've got to keep the quality up. I have many shops I deal with that are big shops that move a lot of product and turn out really good stuff. But I also, at the same time, have quite a few customers that have tried to get really big, and as Gary stated, they just lost quality control. Everything, next thing you know, you've got more stuff blowing up than what is actually going out, and more overhead, more expenses, more everything, and in the big picture, they end up losing market share and end up, a couple I could tell you that I know lost their businesses over it. They just let things get too out of control, trying to pump out too much, too many pieces, and they went from putting out a very, very good engine to a really bad piece. And hey, if we can get more out, we'll make more money. Well, it backfired. So that attention to detail is synonymous with what we try to do here. Are we perfect every single time? No, absolutely not. We make mistakes. We're human. but we do try to put out a very, very quality product, and and that takes us a little longer. I'm not able to get everything out the door as fast as we'd like to sometimes, especially in the current environment. Material supply shortages are out there. Everybody reads about them in the news. Well, let me tell you, folks, this stuff is absolutely real. There's real problems getting raw material these days, but we're doing our absolute best to maximize everything we're putting out as quickly and timely as possible, and with the same quality control as we always have. And I know that's that's Gary's thing. It's got to go out right, or it's not going out.
I've had the same employee assembling every single engine now for 25 years, and the people that have raced and used our engines, they know him by name. They know he touched every single bolt. I hone all the blocks, and I deck all the blocks, and I do the cylinder heads, and I port the manifolds. And Jason puts them together and puts them together and puts them together. That's all he does. He usually has 4 of them going at one time. So we get hung up. He's waiting on me and anything. He just moves to another one. And we've been together that long and do a good job. And so I kind of make it, I give the analogy of this. I mean, you can go to Golden Corral and get a mass-produced steak, or you can go to Ruth Chris and get a fine piece. It's going to cost you more. You're going to have to wait a little while that cook makes it exactly how you want it. But that's the difference in quality.
Very interesting. No, I think it is. I think it is great, and a great attitude for the drag racer, for the racer at all. Like, that's the racer mentality, and to take that through the engine building process, through the track and race winning process. That's obviously why you've been successful, both on the track and in the shop, because of the mentality. Now, I will ask you a little bit later on in the show about some advice to the next generation. I just want to put that out there so you start thinking about it. Keith, get ready with some final questions for Gary. I got to ask you about your driving this year. I know that we stood on a stage after Brainerd. You picked up a win out there. Not, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wins out there at Brainerd, it appears. And you took over the points lead. Where are you standing in the championship saga right now? Not to timestamp the show. If you're listening in the future, you got to go figure out what happened, but tell us about your championship hopes in Super Comp in 2021.
Well, let me tell you that I started out this year, and for the first time ever in 30 or 31 consecutive years of running Super Comp, I told everybody I'm not running for points. I'm not going to run the full season. I'm not going to run the full schedule. I'll be 60 next year in February. I'm like, you know what? I want to go have some fun and run my Camaro at some of these big money bracket races. So the first half of the year till late July, all I did was go to those bracket races and run my Camaro. And the thing about that is that level of competition is so stout. I mean, you can be 003, dead on 3, and lose the round. So it forced me, if I wanted to be competitive, and I am very competitive, I wanted to win. So it forced me to make myself better. I wish I'd have done this 20 years ago, because I stepped up my game and I really honed in on getting those 00 reaction times and making my car that good. And I didn't win one, but I got down to 3 cars, 4 cars, 8 cars at several of them, and was definitely where I wanted to be. So when late July came around and we have our division races here 50 miles from my house at Heartland Park, Topeka, there's a double divisional and a Topeka National and a Great Bend divisional, and I'll always go to Indy. I've been very fortunate. I won my first ever national event there in '94. I won it again in 22 years later. I will always go to Indy. That's the magic place of, that's whatever. So I said, well, I'm going to run from the end of July through Indy. Then I'll go back to bracket racing. Well, what do you know? The enhanced learning driving experience made me better at both ends. And I drove like I was 20 or 30 again, and I won the Great Bend Divisional, and I won the Brainerd National event. And the next thing I know, I had not even looked at points. I had no concern with points. And somebody calls and says, hey, you're leading the world. And I'm like, oh, crap. Now you got to go chase them. Right?
Yes.
Now you got to go do that. And I didn't want to do that. It's so much time off of work. It's so much stress. And then you start worrying about who's doing what and when and what. And so ever since then, of course, now I've got nothing but I've ran like 5 races, and I think every single event I've ran a former world champ or Indy champ or something, and I've had no luck. And so I've slid down to third or fourth. I mean, me and Ray Miller are tied. And just a week ago today, we were tied for first, and now we're both second, third, or third and fourth by now. I am going to Dallas tomorrow for the national event. If I was to win the national event there, I would go back up. I don't know if I would take over the lead because I think Christopher Dodd, the reigning world champ, is winning rounds today in Dallas, the Houston makeup. So Bob Prost won over the weekend, but I'm not done. I'm not out of it. I have 2 more nationals, so I'll see how I do at Dallas and then decide if I'm going to go to another one. Unlike when you're much younger and you've never done it and that's all you can think of, now it would just be nice if it happened. I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but at the same time, I'm not going to walk away and go, "Oh, I don't want to finish," you know. So
Yes.
I'll go do it, and we'll see how it turns out.
Excellent. No, I love it. I love it. We got the table set on Hidden Horsepower. People are going to have to go check and see what the results are. Keith, final questions for Gary Stinnett. Your thoughts?
Well, Gary's kind of already answered it because where I was going to go, and he's we've talked a lot about rings and a lot about engines, and my question for Gary was, hey, what happened to going not chasing the Super Comp Championship? Because we talked about it a lot in the earlier part of the year and how much he was enjoying going to the brackets, and hadn't done that in so long, and like you say, next thing you know, he's in the points lead and he's chasing her down.
Simple as that. But hey,
Yep.
The world calls. You got to answer. That's just the way it is. The world calls. You have to answer. All right, Gary, we like to imagine that there are some young go-getter, future machinist engine builders out there who listen to Hidden Horsepower because they're interested. And, I like to try to extract a little advice for the next generation. Like if you're talking to young Gary, your own self, like what would you say to those folks out there? It's kind of a benchmark here on Hidden Horsepower to try to gain a little advice, a little knowledge, a little something that'll get them a leg up on the competition when they're out there in the world trying to get a job in a field that they love. Doing the right thing. We've heard, keep your mouth shut so no one hears how dumb you are. we've heard so many different pieces of advice. What do you got to say to the next generation of engine builders and machinists out there?
Well, I can tell you that this isn't going to be well liked and accepted by everybody I'm about to say, but I've hired several employees that came out of schools that they paid a good bit of money to learn the trade, and I've had several interview, and they walk through the door and immediately they're almost, I'm not gonna say they're almost arrogant, but they're like, I can do everything, I know it all, I went to the school, I learned everything. Yep, I learned how to hone a block, I learned how to do a valve job, and when I've hired them, I've had to completely retrain them, and they're $25,000 or $50,000 in debt. So in my humble opinion, if I was a young man, and so this is how I did it, but this is how I feel like it. Go get a job as a parts washer. We've hired dozens of them. They last a year or two. Get a job as a parts washer, and even if you get paid minimum wage, at least you're not paying a fee. Work in that shop, listen, pay attention, ask questions, learn, and move up. This is the old traditional way for the last 200 to 300 years. You didn't walk in the door one day and become a blacksmith or a watchmaker. You started as an apprentice. And in fact, if I had to do it all over again, and I basically did do this, I would work for free so I could learn and not have to at least pay somebody. I had no money. I worked for $100 a week for Norman Palmer. But the thing I learned from Norman Palmer, Billy Graham, and Warren Johnson wasn't this is how you hone a block, or this is how you run a mill, or this is how you run a lathe. What I learned from them that you cannot learn at school was the way they thought. That's been the single biggest thing in my entire life, is to look at something and study it and say, how does that work, and how can I make that better? What's really going on there? Not what a magazine article tells you, not what some teacher in school told you. Think about it. Actually study it and dissect it. Wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, and then in the old days, go read a book, but now go online, Google, find out about everything you can find about how that's made, manufactured, materials, and study that, and work up through the ranks, so to speak, and that's how you'll become a master craftsman. You can't just go write a check for it and have somebody give it to you in 6 months.
Wow. Incredible. Great episode. Gary, this was awesome. I wish you luck in your non-world championship, world championship chase. And so much great knowledge. And right at the end, like I thought you really brought it home right there. That was amazing. I wish you good luck. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Keith, say goodbye to Gary. I don't think it gets better than that.
No, it really doesn't. I want to kind of reiterate on one of the things that Gary said. Having been very fortunate working for Total Seal and being able to travel to other countries, the apprenticeship programs that are in the other countries that you rarely see here anymore are something that that we need to to really adopt and readdress. I mean, you remember back in the old days, you had an apprentice plumber, an apprentice electrician, an apprentice machinist. When did you hear anybody ever say that anymore? That you've gone under an apprenticeship. You're going to learn that trade from someone like Gary that's been doing this for decades and decades, and then work out to become the journeyman and then the master electrician. This is something that I've always said, and I will continue to say, this is something that's sorely missing out there in the trades. Is bringing these guys under the wing and teaching them and letting them show them what share that knowledge. We always talk about Grumpy and Smokey and all these guys. God, you got to write all that down. You got to put it in a book, because otherwise that information is going to be lost to the ages. And that's the honest truth. You think of all the things that Gary knows and all the things that Gary can share with somebody to pass that knowledge on and keep that alive for eternity. It's an important thing, and it's something I think that's missing out there.
Gary, anything to add there?
I was just going to ask, how did you become the master of your craft?
Me?
Yourself.
Joe. Hasn't happened yet. Still working.
No, it has.
It hasn't.
Listen, how much higher can you go in the automotive announcing world, whatever you call yourself?
Sure.
There's not much more you can go unless you're going to do the Indy 500 on NBC or something, right?
Right.
So how did you get where you're at today? You started in your basement, ground roots, and worked your way through. You didn't go to a school to learn this, correct?
No. I mean, I did get a communications degree from community college, but as soon as I got that, I went and got a job at a local radio station, and that's where 99% of the learning happened. And honestly, you mentioned those schools. They have them for broadcasting as well. And in the broadcasting world, probably much more so than the machining world. But in the broadcasting world, it was really hey, work in the world of sports. You want to be next to your favorite athlete doing a job? Yeah, come to us. We'll teach you how to do it. And maybe they would get you an apprenticeship, which would be called an internship in radio. But once I got the radio job, that was it. I was working, I was holding the microphone. Of course, I was a track announcer before any of that stuff. And it really, what drove it was passion. Like, this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be good at it. Eventually, somewhere along the line, there would be money. I'm not destroying my body like my dad did as a cement mason who went through that whole apprentice, journeyman, master thing that you were talking about with masonry. But it destroyed his body. The guy had like 8 hernias over his life, picking up block, that kind of stuff. And he always told me the stories like, Joe, use your mind, don't use your body, because look at what happened to me. And so I overlearned the lesson, and now I just talk, and it's worked out pretty well.
But that's the same with Keith. The same thing, Keith. You didn't start out of high school, I'm going to be a piston ring engineer and go to a school. You also had a journey like we've all had and learned and are still learning every day like we all are, correct?
Absolutely, 100%. I grew up in a racing household in Illinois. Grew up around that stuff. My dad was super into it, so that made me into it. And as Gary said, you sought out jobs and people that you could learn from and continue to grow. And spent many years doing that. And as Gary said, when I first came to work for Total Seal, I didn't know anything about piston rings. Great guy Jim Edwards handed me a couple of books. When I first started here, he goes, here, read these, and started there. And then just, as we all said, just started trying to gobble up all the information that I could, material technologies, coating technologies, tribology, learning about lubrication, just, trying to absorb and use that. And at the same time, and it's something that, I'll call a gift in the DNA from my father or my mother, the ability to look at something and understand how it works. Some people have that, some people don't. You can look at it and you can form that picture in your mind and go, yeah, no, I get that. And now how do I make that better? and and studying and learning that, and having being very blessed to have that that kind of a gift. That's kind of the story, and always trying to push it to make it better. How do we do this better? Because nobody ever comes at us and asks us for something less.
How about Gary?
Exactly.
How about Gary taking over the show, Keith? Like, he's asking us questions. That hasn't happened.
I love
before.
it. Well, I love it.
I got to tell you, I know we're running along and you can cut this out, but you guys are going to enjoy this. The part I was talking about learning is when I went to work for Norman Palmer, and he had just won the world championship in comp. He won it with a front engine dragster. Why? Well, he found a class that had a softer index at the time, and it was so he built. This is the epitome of the guy that thinks outside the box, right? He said, I'm going to use a 4-cylinder Datsun engine, but it needs a bigger bore. So he bored the block out way bigger and then furnace brazed new sleeves in the block. And then built his own sheet metal manifold, carburetors, all that, right? So it made a little 4-cylinder engine. And then he said, but it needs to be a stick shift. How am I going to shift a manual transmission between my legs? The front engine dragster was because it would be lighter than a rear engine model. So then what did he do? He figured out you could take that Doug Nash 4 or 5 speed and flip it upside down. It doesn't care what direction it runs. So he flipped it upside down, therefore putting the shifter on the right side instead of on the left side, so he could use his right hand to shift. Now it's in the way of the butterfly steering wheel. How do we get around that? Cut that half off. Don't need it. We got a butterfly wheel. We just need one left hand. We're only using left hand. So he had a one-sided butterfly steering wheel. Now we need the car to be light. Now this is all before I came along, but this is how I got to learn how to think, right? Him and WJ, same thought process. So he's like, how can we make this car lighter? Well, we don't need a fuel pump. What do you mean you don't need a fuel pump? We'll just pressurize the gas tank. So as a crewman, my job became to take the air tank, and there was a Schrader valve in the top of the gas tank in the nose of the dragster where it needed weight to not wheelie. And when he's at the hold line, I aired up the gas tank till I had 7 pounds. And it was big enough, he'd done the math, to hold that 7 pounds of pressure through the finish line. So we had no fuel pump. And he won the world championship for this car in 1980. And by 81, when we're working together, NHRA didn't have a meeting back then. They just decided to hit your index. So when we won the Mile High Nationals and go 70 under, wham, Monday morning, you lost 2 tenths. So, and I wasn't there when he built the next generation, which was a year later. He just made it a 6-cylinder version. It's a new class. Instead of D econo dragster, now it's an E econo dragster. Same engine, 2 cylinders more, all those tricks. And NHRA said, hey, you can't have a one-sided steering wheel. What do you mean I can't? Nope. Got to have 2 butterflies. Okay. He makes it where it hinges, and it has nothing but an O-ring around the backside to keep the steering wheel V'd out. He would leave it in the out position when it's in the stage lanes and tech inspection. He'd do the burnout, back up, and right before he would stage, he would fold it, and it folded both flat into his left hand so he could shift the shifter. How, when you're 18 years old, you're working for a guy with a mind like that?
Right.
Do you not learn to think those ways?
To think those ways. Exactly. To analyze.
Completely outside of the box.
Yeah.
Finding the gray area in everything. That's incredible.
Well, and your comments.
And then
go ahead.
A few years later, I'm working for Warren Johnson, and he thinks exactly the same way. He was flying to Detroit or to Flint, Michigan, and scraping sand away on the head, so we didn't have to weld the heads like Rear Morrison. We could just port them. Then we could move the lifter over. Then we could move the cam lobe over. Then we could put Jessel rockers on it. And wonder why that year we go 190 and everybody else can only go 186.
Awesome.
Those are the people.
Absolutely awesome.
Those people didn't teach me how to build an engine. They taught me how to think about building an engine or a race car or stuff even in Super Comp that I have today. Now, my Super Comp dragster that nobody else has or doesn't have the exact idea, or even the changes that I make week to week or year to year to make my dragster better than the other people I race.
Can you talk about that, or is that top secret? Certain stuff.
I can talk about it.
But I mean, like,
I'm not going to give you specifics.
Well, there's one innovation that I thought was pretty cool, and you won the world a couple of years ago, and then nobody was doing it. And now other people are doing it, and you were telling me about it in Indy. And, I don't know how public that is, about how many different gears there are.
Oh, yeah. So high gear well, I call high gear only, but it's just leaving in high gear. That's been around since actually John Spar did it when he owned B&M in the 80s. He did it because he had a blown dragster go 200 mile an hour, and he couldn't make it leave the starting line and go on a stop and do all that. So he did it, but he had some success, but not a lot. And then a couple other people tried it, but it was in 2006 where I had enough horsepower that my car was violent leaving, and I needed to calm it down. And I came up with the idea of a split throttle stop, and I tried some other stuff, and I finally just said, I just leave in high gear. So I started leaving in high gear, and nobody knew it. And the first year I did it, it was the week after Indy, and I struggled with it a little bit. The very first race I got to the final round, I just got beat. And then by the end of the year at the World Finals, I won Pomona that way. I kept it a secret, and nobody really knew it, and I won the World Championship with it in 2010 and in 11. And then in 2012, my good customer, Al Kinney, who was running Super Comp, I'll never forget, he was unloading an engine, and he says, I got a question for you. He said, you suppose a guy could get a light on a 4/10 Pro Tree if he left in high gear? And of course, 2 world champions just currently, I'm smiling. He goes, that's what I thought. So he did it, and he won the world championship in 2012. So the high gear car won in 3 consecutive years, 10, 11, and 12. And then the problem, though, and the reason I've gone away from it now, is that it does very well in most applications, but under certain track preps, it will actually stick the tire and the car won't move. I mean, it does, but you'll have a 40 or 50 light and you don't know why. I let go on time. I'm pretty sure I let go on time. You could put a camera on it or any kind of recording, but it just did not have enough torque, even with as much power as I got, to actually move it and have a 00 or a teen light. So in the heat of the summer, I could do very well, and I won a lot of hot summer divisionals and stuff, or national events in the summer. But in the spring and fall, it wasn't good. I went back and forth for several years, and I finally said, it was actually Mike Furter that called me one day and said, and you know how he could be. He's like, Stinnett, would you quit screwing around, put your car back in low gear, and just race like everybody else? You'll still be able to beat him. So I've done that, and I have a really good
old Furt.
A really good combination in low gear right now. You can deal with it in other ways. You just had to, again, think outside the box and figure out how to do it in a different manner. But there's still people, I can't name names, there's still people that run high gear today. A really good friend of mine won the Topeka Divisional in high, and another guy, they're still out there, and there's people still trying, but it's not consistently good. I can't answer why when I tell you it was good in 10 and 11 and 12. Maybe it was track prep back then. Maybe when you had a 40 or 50 light, those particular rounds you got by, and then you can't get by with that today. I don't know the answer to that, but there's been a lot of innovations over the years that I and we and people have done, and some work. And I mean, there's a top dragster that won the world championship, believe it, in high in top dragster not very long ago. So it's still out there and around, and it still works, but it definitely takes a lot of other items. You got to work on the car to make it work. That's what I'm saying.
Got it. Well, I just appreciated the innovation to go with something that others weren't using to gain an advantage and win a couple of world championships. Like, to me, that's what it's all about. Gary, great job. Really appreciate you on Hidden Horsepower. This has been one of my favorite episodes. Just so much information, some stories, details, engines, driving. Absolutely love it. I thank you for coming on the show. Wish you good luck for the rest of the racing season, and thank you for being on Hidden Horsepower.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Gary Stinnett with us here on Hidden Horsepower. Keith, how great was that?
It was awesome. I knew it would be. Gary's such a great guy. He's got so much knowledge, so many great stories. Grew up like a lot of us did. Figured this stuff out, just working on it and doing it and being around the right people. I knew it was going to be great, and I really, really appreciate him taking the time.
Yes, and a new quote for our great quotes of Hidden Horsepower. I think the leader for all time will be "You can't tune it up if you blew it up" by Warren Johnson. But this one related through Gary Stinnett from Warren Johnson: you can be a machine operator or you can be a machinist. And to me, that is very today. You can choose to be the guy plugging in the numbers like George Jetson or Homer Simpson pressing those buttons, or you could be somebody who's actually driving the machine. The way he described that to me was awesome. I could visualize exactly what he was saying.
100%.
Amazing stuff. Keith, for people who are interested, they want to get a hold of you, and so many complimentary things Gary said about custom ring packages for whatever the specific need is. That's what we've been saying the whole time. If you've got a turbo LS, if you want to drive on the street with 1,200 horsepower, if you want to build a Super Comp engine, there's a different package, and it starts out with a call to Total Seal. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to us at TotalSeal.com. Myself and all the other guys' emails are on there. Just pick one of us. Reach out, ask your questions, give us a call. The 800 number is 800-874-2753. We welcome your phone calls. Just reach out, as we've said in the past, and as Gary said in this, in today's Hidden Horsepower. It's all about the custom. It's all about making it specific and right for what you do. And maybe we have a box kit that is the right thing for what you're doing. A lot of people use them. A lot of people love them. But call us, again, back to make us your first call, not your last, to make sure you're getting the right part for what you're doing. It's so important. It only takes a little bit of time to assure that you're getting exactly the right package for your application.
Excellent. Keith, great job as usual.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate you taking the time and making all this happen.
Yes, sir. He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales at Total Seal Piston Rings. I'm Joe Castello. You can follow me at WFO Joe on Instagram and Twitter. How about those great things Gary Stinnett said? Unbelievable. Also, I do a podcast called WFO Radio. You'll see me out there on the NHRA Drag Racing Series Tour. And be sure to subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and check us out on one of the Total Seal Trackside Tech Talks. We'll be doing stuff at PRI as well. And we'll see you next time on the next edition of Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal.